Shwmai a croeso cynnes, and welcome to the What's Your Story podcast. I'm James Owen, a Welsh filmmaker and storyteller, and I'm passionate about sharing stories. This podcast is all about business owners sharing their journey, and we'll be speaking with directors, entrepreneurs and creatives from all across Wales to learn from their experiences. We believe everyone has a story to tell. What's your story? Shwmai and welcome to the next episode of What's Your Story. And we absolutely love filming conversations with Llanelli business owners. And we've got a really exciting one, a very tasty episode here today. I've got a good friend here, Mr. Ben Conde, who is Conde, who is an executive pastry chef. Have I said that right, Ben?
Close enough.
Yeah. Ben has just set up his very own bakery here in the town of Llanelli, and it tastes really, really good, doesn't it, Ben?
Doing our best. It's getting there. It is getting there. Yeah.
It is getting there. For those listening and watching, could you please share, in a couple of sentences, who you are, what you're doing, and where you're at currently?
Yeah. So I'm Ben. Got a bakery in Llanelli called Saint Hugo. We specify in laminated doughs, so croissant, pain au chocolat, the sort of classic pastries you'd know and love, but trying to do them in a way that is considered. So every ingredient is considered. It's refined. It's unapologetically tasty. It's pretty, and so we stuck that in the middle of the town centre, and we are trying to push what we can do with food in a small town, and bring the people along for the ride. So yeah.
Well, I think so far it's been very successful as far as startups go. You're doing really, really well. Did you imagine as a young boy, you when you were older, that you'd have your very own bakery?
I'd considered it, but I hadn't considered it here. I think it's. I left to learn food, not knowing where I'd end up.
You were born in Llanelli?
Born in London, raised in Llanelli. Moved here when I was 4. So I didn't consider when I left to go and learn food that I'd ever come back, because I didn't put a place on where I wanted to set a bakery or to settle. And I think what I learned along the way was that the ingredient is always king, and you have to prioritize where the ingredients are, where the opportunities are. And I think we're surrounded by grass fields with dairy cows for our milk, and we've got great butter and shiagar, and we've got all kinds of gour fruit and strawberries and raspberries, and so I pictured it, no, but does it make sense now? I think it does. It makes a lot. It's quite makes a lot.
So who taught you how to bake? Did you go to bake school?
No, there's no bake school.
Cookery school? I don't know what the term is.
So I had a grandfather who was a chef growing up. So he was a relief hotel catering manager. So I guess what you would see as an exec chef now. So he would go into a hotel, fix their problems, cover someone, but run the whole operation from restaurant to amenities to in-room dining to all of it. And so those sort of formative years when you're sort of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the sort of when you're building your ideas of what food is, and most people are having a spaghetti bolognese or having a McDonald's, or I was having a chicken chasseur with some sage freshly picked from the garden, or having a tarte tatin or an apple pie with cloves in it, and just so a little bit of pastry, but being made to cook that. So I think I didn't have to learn the fundamentals of palate and flavor, I think, in the same way that I think most people would. That's not to say I don't love other foods. I'm a terrible junk food fiend. I love a chicken nugget on the way home. I'm not averse to a McDonald's and beige food, but I think those formative years with him teaching me food from the basics, and my mum carrying on that with some other cooking bits, I think sort of ingredient-led cookery from day one was where I learned to cook more than anything. And then I messaged somebody on Instagram when I was about 22 and just went, I want to cook, can I have a job? And he was called Lorian. He worked in Coca Rico in Cardiff, and I thought, this guy's going to tell me to bugger right off. He's just going to say no. There's no way. And he just replied with, come in tomorrow. And I thought, why not? Here we go.
So that was the start of your cooking
That was
journey?
that was the start of
Asking
pastry.
somebody for a job.
Yeah, pastry. I thought, if not now, well, my grandfather got sick, and I thought, I'm doing the wrong thing here, because I was studying law at the time, and I hated it. And then when I qualified, I was a terrible lawyer, like so bad. Like no passion in it at all. And it's like with food, if you don't care about something that is that hard to do, you're just going to quit. When the second it gets hard, or the second you can't figure something out, you're going to leave. So yeah, maybe 23 years old, something like that. And I just thought, I'm not enjoying this. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do food, I've done the odd like pub job. I had a street food van when I was 19, did loads of street food in Trostra. And that was internationally, and we did really well. So there's that concept of, good cooking, good food, good ingredients already there. But I think pastry had that precision that I'd lacked forever, lacked since I was a child. And savory food is very much like a bit of this, a bit of that, and it gets better with Michelin-starred food, and you get into those kitchens and you see that. But pastry has this like crazy science to it, where the deeper you dig, the more you find, and it never ends. So you could open a book tomorrow, read it start to finish, and it'll be completely different to what you've read the week before. And so for me, it was the ability to fall down a rabbit hole and it never have a bottom. So that's where I started with Lorien, and he was very French, very angry. I remember he said to me, "Your law degree doesn't mean anything here. Get in the kitchen." And I went, "Okay, let's go in there."
In that accent?
Well, but that was it. And yeah, it's. I remember I made scones. Was the first things I ever made for him, and they were all right. They were fine. They were much better a week later, but yeah, good entry point to it, I think.
So that's the start of your sort of journey in baking, cooking. And tell me, how did that transition to where you're at now? Did you work there a couple of years? Did you then get a job in another place? Because you were in Cardiff at this point.
I was in Cardiff at that point, yeah. So I'd at the time before that, I'd just gone to France for a little bit to sort of see what food was about, see where I was going to enjoy, lived there for a little while in Nice. And that's where the name Saint Hugo comes from. So Saint Hugo, I used to sit on a street called Rue Victor Hugo and have a pain au chocolat and a coffee every day. And it was almost like this like ethereal moment of like, this is what food could be. This is the perfect moment. You've got the sun hitting you, the atmosphere's great, coffee's great, the pastry's great, or what I knew was great at the time. What you realize now is that pastries are all frozen in France, and it's just an illusion. It's only when you go to Paris do they get good, really, or really artisanal places. But so it was almost like this ethereal thing. So for me, it was about recreating that moment of that Rue Victor Hugo moment, but here, right? And so it was like my saint was that street and that moment. So Saint Hugo comes from that. But I think I worked for Lorien for a little while. I did like 3 days a week for free. And I remember I asked him for a job paid, and he just said he couldn't afford it. And I thought, you bugger. Yeah, but he taught me an awful lot for free as well. And I think that's important to recognize that the information costs money and it costs time. And if someone's willing to give you their time, I don't think I understood that at the time. So I then went on from there. I worked for him for a little bit longer. I did a few shifts on and off, but COVID was getting closer and closer and closer, and it was becoming more apparent that we were going to go into a lockdown. And so I then went to do Tom Simmons in Cardiff. So he had a Michelin plate restaurant at the time in Pontcanna. Went to work for him. He was opening a bakery called Ground Bakery. That was fascinating, but it wasn't quite ready yet. So I moved. I bounced around a little bit in Cardiff because I wasn't really sure what the next move was. I was a bit sort of like, okay, well, I've got these pastry fundamentals, but do I apply them to a restaurant? Do I apply them to a bakery? Do I apply them to myself? Like, how do I do it? So in the same year I did that, I worked for Tommy Heaney. So he was on Great British Menu, and he's got a place in Pontcanna as well. And then I did a pop-up restaurant called Sablé, where we did pastries, and that was crazy. But they never really resulted in something sort of long-term. So I thought, well, I'm going to apply for Bake Off and just see what happens. And I thought, they're never going to, they're not going to say yes to that. But they did. So that sort of called my bluff on that one. So I went to do that next, which I think was the bit that opened all of the doors, to be honest, because the networking of that, like, I mean, you'll know more than anybody. Like, if you're the least intelligent person in the room, get out of the room, go to another one. You need to feel complete imposter syndrome in the kitchen to have any form of growth. Otherwise, your ego is going to get in the way and you're just going to think you're the best person there.
Very true.
And it's pointless.
So going on a TV program like that, you think really built up your network early on to also upskill you, but also get connections and build a network really you could tap into to have support, maybe job opportunities. So yeah, how do you get off on the Bake Off?
I think those shows, and I think I implore anybody to do competitional food and baking, and because I think the personal growth in those is far more than you'd ever learn from doing your own thing on your own. Because I think you're put up against people that you will view as better than you, I think, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I think they have a very, very, very different skill set to you. And the second you learn to view them like that and realize that what you do is equally as good as them, it's just never going to be the same. So if you're trying to win based on being better than somebody else, you're never going to win. It's not possible. And you have to go into those challenges and think that you're not good enough to feel that push behind you to push you to be better, right? And so I think those shows are intense, time intensive. The prep involved is insane. You do months behind the scenes on them to do these 4-hour challenges that aren't long enough. But the people you meet, for example, like you've got Ishan and Jojo on the first series, working for Cafe Royal with the UK pastry team lead as their exec chef. You've got Sarah on the first show and Giovanni, like they were head pastry chef for Fortnum and Mason. And then you've got like Kevin, who was working for Harrods, and Nathan used to be the head chef of Harrods. And then you've got me in the corner with a random guy because my guy got ill. And I'm thinking, this is not it, man. Like, this is not. But then you like I said, I felt like the worst person in the room. But then I was the one going home every single weekend, not working at the time, being able to put in 60, 70 hours of research in a week, living on my own with a cat, just researching and researching and researching and researching and researching. So we did Final 6 on that series because we just put in the most legwork. So we got as far as we did because of that. And I think after that, having those people that I could reach out to, I mean, you had Enrico and Antoine were another team in our heat on the year one. And I subsequently went on to work for an agency that got me into work for Cedric Grolet and other crazy hotels like L'Oscar and the English cricket team and Chelsea Football Club. And because he worked for an agency that you needed a recommendation by someone who works for them, and he worked for them. And then Ishan worked for Cafe Royal, and that resulted in me being good friends with Michael Kwan, who taught me how to do crazy sugar showpieces. And, you know, these connections that, you know, he now works in the Dorchester and I worked for Coworth Park that were part of the same collection. And we shared resources to get ingredients cheaper and make sure that things worked properly during an ingredient crisis. I think those networking things are far underrated in the food industry. And without them, you're stuck. You're really stuck. Yeah.
And how does it feel looking back now? Maybe you've some of these people are some huge names, both personally and some of the organizations and businesses that you worked with. For me, who doesn't really, I mean, I love food, right? But I've never been to some of these high-end restaurants and things. It's another world to me. How does it feel as someone who studied law, didn't really go to cooking school, or, you know, in my world, it's film school, right? Yeah, people would go to university to study film, to have that experience and ultimately get a degree that opens up opportunities. But I often come across, you know, you don't need to go to university to take certain routes in life. So how did it feel to you working alongside some of these successful people who maybe studied at an academic level to learn how to cook, whereas you had a law degree? How did it feel? Did you feel like, why am I here?
Yeah, I think there's, for me, it's about approach, right? So they will be trained very classically in how to do certain things, right? So they'll make a creme pâtissier in the same way every time. They'll make a sweet short dough in the same way every time. They'll make a sourdough exactly as they've been taught every single time in the same way that a Le Cordon Bleu school will teach you to do it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's technically brilliant, but it's been done, right? And if you haven't been taught that, that framework that you've got where you're thinking, this is how this is done, you're already sitting up here somewhere, right? You're already not in that box. So for me, if I don't want to add butter to a creme pâtissier, I don't have to, because my brain doesn't care if it's there or not, right? So if I make it and I go, this is better without butter, no one's going to question it apart from me. No one's going to care whether I've done it or not. There's no technical thing in my brain saying that's not right. Now, there's nothing to say that there's not right ways to do things. There are right ways to make an anglaise and a custard, and there are wrong ways to make an anglaise and curdle it and it go terribly wrong. There's nothing to say that the fundamentals aren't needed, and you have to have that backbone. But those chefs that have been sort of really aggressively trained per se, they've got these constraints on them that I don't think we, as people who have gone into it and worked up from the bottom, have, because I think we approach it in a non-technical way, but applying the technical side after the fact, right? So I'm very flavor-led first. I think that's the difference with the food. And with the way I run a kitchen, it's far more passion-led and far more business-oriented when it comes to the business side of it. Like the law stuff is very much helped out with. So my clerical approach to how we incentivize people, how do we get that fire in people to make them want to come to work in the morning, is very different from this is the technical way to make a croissant. Because I make my croissant and there's a technical croissant, and I don't think they share many similarities, to be honest. But the end result is that our lamination is perfect, our lamination is clean, and the end result is exactly just so. But we just do it in a different way. We sort of two ways around the tree to get to the same hole, right? That's how it works.
Okay, so let's talk about the product itself then, because as you've explained there, you've got one approach, somebody else might have a different approach. I think it's fair to say, from being around you a lot over the last couple of weeks, obsessed is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah.
You are obsessed with how you create, right? You've shared that, you've got to make a croissant 1,000 times to really get it perfect, and for you, maybe making out of every 1,000 croissants, you can only have maybe one go wrong. That's sort of the personal standard you set yourself. Is that right?
I think so. I think it's the obsession in those small details is what makes the macro work, right? So if you've got 1,000 pastries to make every 2 days, then your focus being on the volume or being on the scale of what it is never going to result in consistency across the board. If you look at a Michelin-starred restaurant, their ability to take just as much pride in cutting a chive as cutting a piece of Wagyu beef that's been beautifully seared as a steak, and them have equal importance to each other, is what makes that end result work perfectly, right? So how I shape a piece of butter and how I train my staff and how I train my team to believe that butter square is just as important as that end croissant coming out of an oven, how they egg wash it versus how they bake it versus how they make it is just as important. And how it's even placed on the counter. If you go into the bakery at any point, you'll find almond croissants and almond pain au chocolat are lined up straight, whereas the other ones are on an angle. So your brain can see which one's which and why. And it's about those small micro details. Like our cookies are in a massive pile. The reason for it is because for me, a cookie is always like a big box of cookies. You eat your way through the box of cookies. That's what I want from a cookie. So we've got a massive pile of cookies in the corner. It's just what your child brain wants. You want a massive box of cookies? We've got a big box of cookies. But yeah, the croissants are just so. Because we've spent so much time and effort, just the same amount of effort in the cookies, but we want you to experience it based on the small things that we care about. And that's what, for me, the product is about, is those small muscle memories, those small little details, getting them right. The end result will take care of itself, as long as every single small thing is done right. And my grandfather always used to say, keep it simple, stupid, because he'd be like, no matter how complicated a recipe is, no matter how big anything is, just one thing at a time. Start at the start, take each step correctly, follow the recipe, follow the process, and just trust that each step will eventually result in that, and you'll be fine.
I think one thing we've got in common is I think we're both perfectionists. Is that fair to say?
I agree so. Yeah, I think so.
I really struggle with this because in my world, I could get really involved in the filmmaking process from start to writing a script right up to post-production, the sound design, right? I can get really deep in this sort of stuff, and I've had to learn over time. One thing I say to myself, good enough is good enough, right? Because it could say, in my world, you could work on a film for 8 hours, right, on the edit, and it gets to maybe 60%. You could then work on that for like 16 hours, and it gets to like 80%, right? But there comes a point where it goes from maybe the 80% and it goes 81, 82. There's the incremental differences that to any common person that looks back, they wouldn't bat an eyelid. But for us as creatives, or whether you call yourself creative as a chef, it's those incremental differences that maybe nobody else realizes, but you do, and that's something that you take a lot of care and attention into making that as best as possible. So why is it that in Llanelli, a croissant in Saint Hugo Bakery costs what it does versus going to Greg's?
It's the incremental sort of marginal gain, like you said, with camera gear, for example. You'll get 80% out of the product in that first 70% of spend, right? And so with us, every ingredient that goes into it is considered, everything from start to finish. The water is filtered. The butter comes from a farm in Edinburgh. It's cultured. We sheet it out in a certain way every time. We store it for a certain amount of time. The flour comes from a farm just outside of Paris and is milled internally in Paris to a mill I've been to see. The butter comes from Carmarthenshire that's in the dough. The milk comes from Llaethbaen in Carmarthenshire, so that the fat content is sitting in that 8% range, near a cream more than a milk. The sugar is only from British caster sugar. Do you know what? So it's about... we don't make any more money than normal bakery by charging more money for the product. What we do is put all of any extra money we have into ensuring that the product quality of every ingredient going in has just as much care as the process that we put into it, right? And it's for example, that last 20%, like you see with the perfection side of it, right, is you may spend 10,000 hours mastering that first bit to get that croissant 80% right. And then you have to sort of transition for us as a bakery into seeing that last 20%, that incremental gain is about seeing the perfect in the imperfect. So, for example, when a croissant is not right and it's not quite shining in the right way, we have ways to turn it into something that is as perfect in its own category. So an almond croissant is traditionally made out of old pastries. Now, we don't make it out of old pastries. We know there's a 10% failure rate on a croissant in an oven because the way fans work blows the pastry sideways. It's just how it works. You have to admit defeat on that. But those almond croissants filled with frangipane, stacked with the right amount of syrup and almonds, just so, it gives it that perfection. So it's that level of, we cut no corners, there's no compromise on ingredients, there's never a compromise on process. If we have a volume of something that's going to increase, we ensure that we can increase the volume with the quality having no drop before we even attempt to put the volume out. There's no consideration and that quality can never change. So you come to us, you pay £3 for a croissant, you buy yourself a flat white. It's got the best milk, the best coffee, the best butter, and it will always give you a consistent experience. And that, for me, is like you can make the best croissant in the world, but if you can't make 1,000 of them every single week exactly the same, you can't say you're the best bakery around, right?
You can't call yourself an executive pastry chef.
No, you can't, can you? No, you can't. So for us, it's about high quality ingredients, good quality process, and sheer consistency. And we do that by picking people to take us along, to come along on the journey with us, that just have the same level of passion in what they do. So our baristas, we choose ones that absolutely adore coffee, and if the milk isn't steaming right, they'll go home and fall down a rabbit hole of how to steam the milk properly. They'll be on the phone to the roastery trying to sort the roast of the coffee out if it's not pulling the shot right, or the extraction time's off, or if the chefs notice the butter's not quite right on the delivery, they'll phone the butter company and be like, why is this butter square not square? And they'll ask the question. And it's just about getting our culture on board. And I think Saint Hugo is more about a philosophy towards food more than it is just the product. And that's why all the products have that same level of flavour across the board, because we care about all of it.
I'd love to hear, we've heard about the story of the name Saint Hugo, which is really interesting. I didn't know it came from France, because people actually, I've been telling a lot of people, we've been doing a lot of work together, there's a couple of videos, and they thought your name was Hugo.
Do you know who Hugo is?
Who is Hugo?
Hugo's our sourdough starter. He lives in a jar in the fridge. So we are planning on rolling out some breads longer term down the road. And then mainly as a vessel for us to make a really good sandwich. Because I just want a really good sourdough sandwich.
So that's who Hugo is.
Hugo is our sourdough starter. Yeah.
People keep saying it. No, it's Ben. He's not Hugo.
Yeah.
He's Ben who runs
not
Saint
Hugo. Ben. Yeah.
Good. So you've had a lot of experience in the food industry at very, very high end, running restaurants. Both you've been cooking, you've been baking, you've been managing food costs in very large establishments, in big hotels. You know, you're talking about millions of pounds worth of food costs, which kind of blows my mind for someone who is now running a very small bakery in Llanelli. At what point did you think Llanelli needs a really good bakery?
I think it goes back to that thing of values, I think, where I think everybody needs to run a business. If they want to run any business for themselves, they need to understand the glass ceiling on where you are comfortable with it going, and then the glass bottom where you would perceive it as the worst thing you want to do, right? And for me, it's about building something that's bigger than me for a start. So we train people, we train the experience, we manage how people learn. I think that's the thing for me. And I guess what Llanelli offers is a demographic of people that are historically undertrained or in very specific industries, right? There's not an awful lot of opportunities for people. So like I had to leave for 10 years because I found Llanelli a bit uninspiring at the time for food. It's not hard to say. There was basically a Nando's and a McDonald's, maybe a KFC that was a bit unsafe. That was kind of it, right? And now you've got all these artisanal coffee shops. You've got Shire, you've got Humble, you've got Lolver and Buryport. You've got all these coffee shops sort of coming to the fringe of what Llanelli's trying to do. And I think what we offer is just something very different. I think we offer a place for chefs to learn baking. They can learn viennoiserie. They can learn some breads. We do brioche and all kinds of breads on a normal weekday. And I think they understand that it's a place people can learn now as well. And I think Llanelli needs somewhere where people can learn pastry, they can learn cakes, but they can also come for a sort of atmosphere as well. And I think they can come for a standard they can expect. I think Llanelli has lacked the kind of food that true foodies want for a long time. I think it has it with the brunch market. I think what places like Shire, for example, do is incredible. Like if I go for a breakfast, they're poached eggs every time. Unreal.
Well, anyone.
Yeah.
Or Rachel.
Yeah,
Depends
exactly.
who's working.
Depends who's working, man. But the end-to-end experience for pastry should never be 4 croissants for £1. And no one should ever say to me, I'll have an all-butter croissant, because it should just be that anyway. Like, I think that the understanding of it was what's missing from Llanelli, and I want people to not have to leave for 10 years to find that out. I want them to be able to learn with us. I want them to be able to experience food with us and maybe get a glimpse of what London bakeries, for example, who are the ones who get things first. The London bakeries and hotels and restaurants, because of the nature of the immigration there, and I guess the amount of people there and the type of people there, they get a lot of French, Italian, Spanish, Romanian, Hungarians. And so I think they bring their culture to London first, and then over 10 years, they sort of whittle their way out towards Cardiff, and we get some in Llanelli and Swansea. But I think what we offer is something that is based on a skill set, is based on experience, but hopefully provides people with something that we just don't have. So,
in fairness, there isn't anything like it in Llanelli, I believe. So to actually create something that doesn't exist is great, because there's definitely less competition, right? For anyone to open another coffee shop. Not an absolutely bad thing. For me, who loves coffee, that's a great thing, right? But you're already taking up a chunk of the pie. So it's about opening something and giving the people of Llanelli something different, or something that doesn't exist. So I think, what you've built already is amazing, because there's nothing like it in Llanelli.
No.
I would absolutely love a really good restaurant, because that is something that I think high-end food is something Llanelli's missing. I think they've tried it over the years. I remember I used to go to the Saucepan years ago, before it was the Catalan Co.
That was really good, though. I think what Llanelli missed with that was a really good opportunity. I think it came at the wrong time. It's timing. I think Andy Sheridan, who ran that, Great British Menu, like wicked CV, wicked food.
Simon Wright, I think he was behind.
Behind the Saucepan as well. And I think if that was in Cardiff the year they did it, wouldn't have been a problem. Not an issue at all. But I think Cardiff is 10 years behind London, and Llanelli's 15 years behind Cardiff. And so what you'll find is that, like, to get that kind of food here is a cultural thing less than it is the food. And I think people now are prioritizing food in a way that it's the new pub, right? In lockdown, you couldn't go to a pub. You had to go to a bakery, because that was what was open. And I think people are very accepting of the fact that brunch cafes, restaurants, good food that is the new pub. That is the new going out. You don't go out for a massive like drink session on a Saturday night. You go for brunch on a Sunday or a dinner on a Saturday. And I think people are coming to the conclusion that high quality matters. You know, quick and easy is not always best with pastry, and it's not always best with coffee and food. And I think people are understanding that over time. And it's definitely understanding it here. But high-end restaurant, I could get behind it. But the saucepan was just the wrong time. And it's such a shame. I mean, Cattle & Co is great, though. You want a massive rack of ribs.
It's closed now.
Is it closed?
Yeah. Welsh House about them. Okay, earlier you talked about opportunities for young people, because you went to London, you went to the south of France to learn how to bake. Do you think there's a place now where Saint Hugo can potentially cater to train young people up to bake? Or do you think some of the people you want to train has to go away and have that sort of experience?
I think it's so individualistic. I think food is I think it's always a personal journey. I think your formative years make a big difference. So like I was always fed fruit as a kid, for example, so I'm obsessed with sour sweets now. Like I love acidic fruit and acidic dinners and things like that and dishes. And it's the same with the way you learn food. I think we've had new starters this week, for example, where they walked in and I always ask the same question in an interview. I'm really blunt. I will always say, you can offer me all of this, but what can I offer you? And I think they all have the confidence just to say, I want a place I can learn and I want a place I can ask questions. And I think Llanelli it never had that with food. And it's never had that with pastry especially. And I think the level we do it at makes people intimidated, but in a good way. They see a croissant, and I think if you can look at a food and have no concept of how it came to be. Like the reason I went to work in Michelin-starred kitchens, I went to work for Cherish, for example, after doing Bake Off, right? And she's the judge and she's meticulous. I've got her ruler tattooed on the inside of my arm because it's just, every time I went to work, she'd measure my food and stuff, right? She measured it on the show, made me gasp audibly. But she has this way of like, she makes this food that you just can't visually understand how it even exists. Like it doesn't look like food. And I think what we do with pastry is very similar in the sense that like if you know basics of how to make a croissant, that's fine. You know how to laminate and do a double fold and all those things, that's great. But I think what we do with a lot of products is make people question, how did they even get there? And if you're a chef and you have to question how something exists, then you probably need to go and ask them how, or get in the kitchen to know how. And I think we provide somewhere people can be excited to go and do that. Hopefully in the same way that I had. And I think what we're finding with our new starters now is they've come into the kitchen, and the ones we've employed have been the ones who said, yeah, I really don't know how you did this, but I want to go along for the ride. Like we had a kid, today I did an interview for coffee, young guy, maybe 19, 20. And I said, why do you want to work here? And he just said, I adore what you do. I adore what I eat when I come here. I don't know how you do the food, but I just love coffee. And I was like, you love coffee like I love food. And then he literally turned around to me and was like, can I make you a coffee? It's the first thing he said. And I was like, do you know what? Make me a coffee. And it was incredible. But they're the people we look for, right? That's not actually
what he said. He said, I love effing coffee. Yeah. But you've saved us bleeping it out, so thanks.
But no, they're the people we look for. They're the ones who are like, you can't train curiosity. Give me 4 weeks with anyone curious, and they'll cook the best viennoiserie they've made in months, years. They'll cook a great croissant in 4 weeks. I'll give anyone that time. And I firmly believe you can train a skill set, but you can't train curiosity. And so that's what I hope we bring to Llanelli, is the ability for the curious people to walk into a kitchen, be curious, and have that curiosity supported but sort of channeled to then make an end result that they're happy with. So
how many weeks have you been running the bakery? You've obviously had a bit of prep time, or a couple of months. You've had the prep time of setting it up, finding a space, going through that process of finding the right location. How long have you been running this bakery now?
So the build took about 8 weeks. I was too stingy to pay a contractor. So that was just me. I think I prioritized, we started as a pop-up and no one really got it. So I just kind of went, we've got to build it, right? There's no one's going to help us do it.
Did you actually start the pop-up?
Well, no, I proposed the pop-up to 5 places and everyone went, I don't get it. And you know that line where, like, so I think my girlfriend's mum said it's a really fine line between genius and mad. And he said, like, she said that there's insanity and there's genius, and like Maybe with the pop-up, it went one way where they just went, this guy's mad, but you knew it could be the other side, but you just had to show them. And I think, no one took it. No one got it at all. And so we were going to take the building and just do wholesale. We got a building from the council after fighting with them for a long time for this space that was empty. But it had all problems, like an asbestos floor. The electrics were single phase. We need 3-phase. Like, it was a nightmare. But then through favours and stuff, it just evolved. Like, people we'd done work with before, where all these sort of seeds I'd sown with like a refrigeration company called Angel Refrigeration, right? They do the best.
They do fridges.
Well, they do, genuinely. They do the best fridges, and that I think the best ones you can buy, right? Double tray deep, like nerdy things that like you go, wow, 2 trays deep, 20 trays. Like most people go, oh, get a life. Like, but it makes a difference to me. And I went to her and I said, I don't know how I pay for this. Like, I can't pay 10 grand in a fridge.
10 grand for a fridge?
10 grand for a fridge.
Goodness.
Like, I can't pay 10 grand for a fridge. But she said, like, maybe there's a time we help people out, and she managed to find a way for us to make it work for fridge, freezer, and prover, which then meant it evolved, right? So we did maybe 9 weeks of building. We got the keys in December. Built flat out, test baked for a week. We didn't actually have much time to test bake because some equipment we just couldn't get from London quick enough. The laminator to sheet dough, which didn't turn up. The delivery company we sent, they didn't pick it up. The depot from Palex just didn't want it. They went back and got it in the end, but 3 times. Yeah, we'd take it downstairs around the corner on a pallet for them. Even though they're just a pain. But in the end, we got it there. In fact, my girlfriend's mum put so much effort into getting it there because they have a logistics company. And she threw everything at that. She went to phoned the depot, get me that laminator. Like, it needs to be in that bakery. And honestly, absolute godsend. Because without that laminator, we wouldn't have opened that at all.
You got your flour from Castell?
No. Do you know what made me laugh? I had a delivery last week. Not from I won't say from who, but it turned up 5 hours late, right? The depot's in Croissants. And
Shock or who that is?
Croissants, right? The French delivered a pallet of flour from Paris within half an hour of when they said. And the ones from Croissants were 4 days late.
How does that work?
I thought it doesn't work. No, so we built the bakery, 9 weeks. We've been open about 7 weeks now, trading-wise. This will be our 7th week we're going into now. And I think people's understanding of food is so much different so much better than I could have ever imagined. And I mean understanding in a nicer way. I mean it in like people are so respectful of the effort that's gone in. Because I wondered if people would really care that much. You know, like I think it takes someone like 6 months to plan how to grow a piece of rhubarb. If we put it on a Danish, are they going to care? Are they going to care that it's poached beautifully? Are they going to care that we put 3 days into that Danish? But actually, people are so into the process behind it and the quality behind it that they just get excited. They walk in, their eyes light up, and they're like we did a brie, bacon, and mustard pan Swiss last week. 12 minutes, they were gone. Everyone went that, and whatever that is, because they trust that the product range is great, and so therefore, whatever the new one is, they just want to try it. But yeah, week seven.
Wow, it feels like so much longer.
It feels insane.
Yeah, to see that what you've been doing in the space of just over 2 months, that's great. And what have you? Because you've come from that background of very experienced in the food industry, to now switching gears to business owner, very different world. What have you learned in the last couple of months of setting up your bakery? Because from what I can understand, it started off as a wholesale and then turned into something very different. So what have you learned over these last few months running a business?
Have you seen the Elon Musk? I saw it on a podcast the other day, and he said it's like staring into the abyss and chewing on glass. Because he was like, you get all the problems that are the worst problems, because none of your team can solve them by the time they get to you, right? And I think it's that, being able to just roll with the punches. You're never going to get it right all the time. Never going to get it right. And if you try to get it perfectly right with the way you run the business, you're not going to. I spent years and years and years in every place I worked. I went to the owner of a Rome bakery. They've got the most popular honey toast, TikTok viral. And I said, how did you fund this? How did you pay for this? And he wouldn't tell me. And then I asked another guy who owned Makoko in Bristol, and he had 7 bakers. How do you pay for these, £5 million of bakers? Wouldn't tell me. And I thought they were just being facetious or being evasive for the sake of it. But it's because there isn't a right way. There is no right way. Like how you do your company and how I do mine. The only similarity is that we pay the same tax man.
Yeah,
like that's
true.
literally it. Like the way I get funding and you get funding and the things I put my time and effort into are just not going to be the same things. And I think understanding how it's okay that it can evolve and picking where it evolves is a bit of a weird one. So we were supposed to be wholesale, and wholesale has notoriously low margins, which sounds like a profit gain, right? It sounds like you're going to sit there and say, oh, I won't make any more money out of that. But on the flip side of that, that's not the case. With a wholesale bakery, if your profit margins are low, you can't bring on more people. You can't buy the t-shirt your team want to wear. You have to buy the cheapest t-shirt. You can't give people a croissant in a nice bag that's waxed and stamped with the nice font, pretty. You have to give it to them in a 1p bag because your profit doesn't allow you the space to spend on things that people think are frivolous. Like our sign on the wall inside my bakery was a present from my girlfriend when we opened. And it's really expensive because it's like aluminium and beautiful and like, but those details are what doing retail allows us to do. I don't make any more money doing retail than I would wholesale. I don't. But the reality of it is that I have more access to a customer experience and to bring staff in and take them to the coffee roastery like Wednesday, go and spend the day with them, allocate them a wage while they go and train. You know, if I was doing wholesale and making a 5% slither of money on the top, how am I going to pay someone 150 quid for a couple of hours of training in a roastery? Like, it doesn't work, right?
Wow. Paid training. That's
training.
That's good, mate.
Yeah, it's you have to keep good people, and the only way you keep good people is by respecting exactly who they are, but just never underpay your people. Never underpay them, never pay them late, and show them that you care, and you'll be fine. Lesson-wise, let it evolve, but control which way it evolves. It's gonna move. It's gonna change. Every single time you feel settled is probably when you need to be on high alert. If you're sat at home going, yeah, everything's great, I've got a lovely cup of coffee, what a great, I'm going to order a Chinese, everything's brilliant, it's probably going to go wrong. Like, it's probably the exact moment you'll get someone calling sick, the oven will stop working, the MCBO in the breaker will go, your fridge will turn off, and then you'll have a EHO inspection from Environmental Health, and they'll pick it up that your bin's not got a lid.
National Grid won't fit the three-phase.
National Grid will dig up the outside, dig through a drain. We had that last week. They dug through the drain to get to a cable that was actually not near the drain in the end. So you can't plan for everything. Keep contingencies and people. You are only going to make as good a food as your worst chef. Right? You're only if your chef can't make even the basic cake as well as you can, you're not going to get the top end ones produced because the groundwork isn't there and the philosophy's not there, and you know you have to wash the dishes in the same way that you make the croissant. That's the end of it. And if you're not willing to do that, my lesson is just focus on the small things, let the big things work themselves out. Don't worry about this. Worry about this.
High standards, look after your people, look after your team, treat them well, pay them well, encourage them. All very good lessons that I think we all should, as business owners, take on board. I've certainly learned a lot from that myself. And to see where you are in this short space of time is really inspiring, mate, because it's taken me a long time to get to where I am, and I'm by no means successful. I think you never reach success because when you complete the first level, there's the boss of then the next level. You got to, it's always a game with new challenges. This podcast, Ben, is all about people's stories, and we've gotten here a snippet about Saint Hugo and Hugo the sourdough. Whose story would you love to hear if you were sat down right here at this very table? And maybe somebody who's been very influential in your world, very inspirational, who are in your world of baking, cooking, life, whether they're Welsh or French, whose story would you love to hear?
I think I'd love to hear... I met Thomas Keller a while ago, and he runs a restaurant called the French Laundry in California. They've got 3 Michelin stars, and he's so world-renowned, right? I remember I just joined Cowth Park, and he walked in and he was on the Rue Scholarship dinner, and I thought, I have no place shaking this man's hand, like, at all. But he just asked about me. And I thought, the humility on this man. Like, he's got cookbooks and his stories online to a point, but I'd love to sit him down and ask less about his story of where he came from and more about the why. Why does he like the foods that he does? I want to know the stories behind them. Because for me, like, if I make an apple pie, I don't use cinnamon. I use cloves because my grandfather put 5 cloves in it, right? And then he'd pop them out just before he put the pastry on so you wouldn't bite one. And he'd always use a Bramley apple and a Granny Smith and cook one and change it, and, you know. So I guess I want to know the why from him more than the where.
Why? The why behind the food. Which is great. Ben, thank you so much for coming on, giving time out to your busy day, baking pastries to come in and share your story. If people want to know more about Saint Hugo, about you as an executive pastry chef, where can people find out more?
So we've got the Instagram. To be honest, the Instagram is where we post most stuff. So you'll always find our new food on there. We've got some wicked events coming up on there. So Instagram, Saint Hugo Bakery, or saint-hugo.co.uk. Website's got our full bio, where we came from, what we do, pictures on there, links to all our socials. Just pop in, have a chat. What you'll find is our staff anyone behind that counter cares as much as you do about what you're buying, as much as we made it. So anything you want to know about us, people, jobs, food, coffee, cups, where we get the shelving from, anything in the shop, like, ask them, because they all care as much as we do. So.
Saint Hugo, where will you be in a year's time, do you think?
Hopefully not working 100 hours a week. No.
That never stops.
Hopefully sleeping 8 hours. No, I think I would like us to have a second place that does a bit of bread to bring the sourdough courses on. I think people need to, and I think people really enjoy making something start to finish. So for me, it's about continuing that ethos. I'd like us to have more people on board to be trained by more head chefs. And just to keep building something that is for a purpose, not just for a product.
Excited to see where that goes. And if you want a pan suisse, a pan chocolat, a croissant, a croissant, whatever you want to call them, go visit Saint Hugo. It's a very tasty bakery in Llanelli. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you.
What's thank you in French?
Merci.
Merci. Merci. Thanks for coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you so much.